let's get started. So, firstly, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I would like to say hello. I particularly would like to warmly welcome all of our speakers today. We have an international panel yet again from across the world, and I think we probably all need to really take our hats off to our colleagues from Canada. It probably is the very early hours of the morning for you guys, Jennifer. So thank you so much for joining us at this ungodly hour. And to our colleagues from Brazil, I'm imagining it's very early in the morning for you too. So thank you again for joining us. We do welcome you most warmly to this UK-based conference, and perhaps we need to be more considerate of international time zone in future conferences. What we're going to look at today, and this obviously today follows on from the very successful conference that we held in June, where we had started to explore and think about and talk about the just how we're all responding. I think we would probably all agree that we are heading into, or some of us have already started, what is possibly one of the most challenging academic semesters that we've ever faced, not just for us and our institutions, but also for our students too. So what we've lined up today are a group of fellow journalism educators who have a wide range of experiences and who are looking at different aspects of their own experience and their students' experiences of how they are responding to the world in which we live in at the moment, and how we can best be ready for the challenges that lie ahead. I think we probably all know that these days present great opportunities as well as great challenges, and I think probably all of us are coming up with really good ideas to do things differently, and at the same time retaining some of the stuff that we already do really well. And we're just going to hear a bit more about that today. So really looking forward to hearing what everybody's got to say. I don't start teaching for another few weeks, so I'm really hoping for some tips to get me through the first few weeks of term, as I know lots of colleagues are. So it's wonderful to see everybody. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at the schedule. It is very tight. We've been quite tight on time, so everyone only has 10 minutes, but we do have discussion at the end of each session. And we also even have time for coffee, and we can run on a bit later because David, who set up the Zoom, has set it up to run until after 1 o'clock. So we do have time to chat, and hopefully that's what some of us might take the opportunity to do, because I think one of the most important things, certainly for me, from the point of view of the AJE, is the community, in that sense of, we're knowing this alone. We are actually in it with other people experiencing the same things, and that's what I get a great deal from the community that we have created through the AJE. I want to quickly say a few thanks. Thanks firstly to all of you for joining us today. Thank you to our contributors today, but I especially want to thank the fellow members of the committee who are helping out today. So I'm going to chair the two sessions, and we have Sean Dodson, who's going to moderate this morning's chat. I would ask that you just keep questions till the end of the first session, and you can put questions in the chat or just raise your hand. If you could mute your mics, that would be really helpful. In the second session, Deborah Wilson-David from Nottingham-Trent is going to moderate the chat, and I'm sure we'll all get through this together. So thank you very much. And I'm going to now hand over to our first speaker, who's Jennifer, and then really when each speaker finishes, I'm going to just quickly go to the next one. So after Jennifer, I'll go very quickly to Rachel, and we'll just try and have less time hearing from me and more time hearing from you guys. So Jennifer, it's over to you if you want to lead us into your really interesting research, which I've heard a little bit about before. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to try to get my PowerPoint set up if you give me one quick moment. Sorry, Margaret, I need 1 second. I know you said I only have 10 minutes and now I'm using up 2 of them. So it is also very late here, like you said, and I wanted to say thank you so much for allowing me to go first, because it is in fact the middle of the night here. But I'm so happy to be a part of this, and you gave me a coffee mug when we were at the WJEC last year, and so I just love it so much. I thought, why not stay up all night? And I'm really looking forward to hearing what other people have to say about what's happening and how teaching is going to look for us. So there we go. Okay, there. Can you see that okay? Okay, great, thanks. So as Margaret introduced me, my name is Jennifer Leask, and I teach at Langara College in Vancouver in Canada on the West Coast. And I, with my colleague Susan Harada, who teaches at Carleton in Ottawa, we did some research in the spring looking at what happened when our institutions had to quickly turn to online. We had, just a few weeks to do that. So it was more of an exploratory study, and it was a survey that we sent out. So Classroom, I just want to give you some background on the Canadian context, which is here we're on a semester system where you end at the end of April, maybe the beginning of May. Instruction here moved online in mid-March. That's when our shutdown happened. And although most institutions have some kind of digital learning platform in place, not everyone was really familiar with it or didn't know how to use all of the tools. And they only had a few days, maybe a week or so, to shift everything from being in classrooms and face-to-face and to finish the term. So when Susan and I set out to do this, we were actually very fortunate because we were working on some other research. So we had all of the contact information we needed for all of the journalism across the country. So we were able to send our survey. It was about 2 to 4 weeks of online only classes for students with a very short period. But we ended up sending it to 42 secondary institutions to include French, English, all kinds of different levels of diploma, certificate, all the way up to master's programs. Although we sent 312 invitations out, we only got 42 responses, which is not the response rate we were hoping for. I think we all know probably why that was, because everyone was trying to figure out how to do it and tired of being on screens and getting through a pandemic and all of that happening. So the low survey engagement is a limitation, but because it's only exploratory, we felt like we learned some good lessons from it. So when we wrote our survey, we wanted to have 3 main areas of interest. One was how the expectations for students changed, what they looked like before, and then what they changed to be during distance learning. How that was affecting students' quality, or the quality of the student work, and then looking ahead, so things to consider, changes that might stick, and what we can learn from what we had to do on kind of an emergency scenario. So we started by brainstorming sort of a list of things that were generally expected of students in the programs we knew of. So we asked instructors to tell us what would normally be required to get full marks. You can see the list of areas on this slide, but they're pretty broad, but it includes things like covering events and meetings in person as eyewitnesses, interviewing sources in person, interviewing a set number of sources, avoiding interviewing your family and friends, and also making sure that you gather all your own original audio, video, photographs. And that's what we asked instructors to say, what is the most important thing for students to get full marks? And what we found was, this is the top 3 areas. The list was quite long. That was a sort of truncated list before, but what we found was for some of them, it was very important that students do the work in a certain way before COVID. So you can see the top one, avoid interviewing family members or friends, was 79%. 65% had to gather their own photographs. You can see that it was very important to instructors that they do this. And then what we see is there was a change when we asked about how those expectations changed on the online only period. They lowered their expectations of students all across the board, and including in our very top 3 areas. So you can see here, the blue is very important and the green is fairly important, and it really shifts. Now, we also know, we can assume that probably the reason those expectations changed is because some of those expectations were just like you couldn't meet them. You couldn't go to meetings because they didn't have meetings. You couldn't interview somebody outside of your household because maybe you had to stay in your household, right? So there is that, that aspect of it that had to be considered. You can see the dark purple color on the right side of your screen is only slightly important, and you see that that really grows. So when we looked at this data, we started to ask, to consider for future what we're going to do. How important is it that students adhere to these ideas, that the traditional expectations of being there in person or not talking to your friends, how important is it that they adhere to that in order to learn journalism? Because they're going to have to do things differently for the next while. So how can we adjust those things? Could some of our requirements be changed, or could we use maybe interviewing your friends as scaffolding? There's a lot of ways to reconsider that. So once we figured out what was important for instructors to expect from students, we wanted to ask what respondents observed for the editorial and technical quality. So for some assignment areas like podcasts, videos, audio, newscasts, print publications, the majority said that those weren't really applicable in the emergency scenario because maybe they had been handed in or they'd been changed to reflect what they were in right now. So you can see that digital publications, group work, and individual reporting assignments was sort of the best data we got. And in some cases, it actually, instructors said it was much better for digital publications and group work. And then individual reporting assignments, it got somewhat better. But you can see the orange part of your screen, 41% for the orange part on individual reporting assignments, it's 44% said it was somewhat worse or much worse. So we know that the editorial quality, according to our respondents, really dropped. So we have to figure out how we can fix that, but I'll get to that in a minute. We also, before we asked about the technical quality of student work, we tried to figure out if student access to technology was cut off, and we found that it was. So with the exception of software access, in some cases increased, and student access to edit suites, voice booths, and computer labs, as you can see on your screen, were drastically cut off. So you can see in the darker orange, that means it was not accessible at all. Those tools were not accessible at all to students during this period. So when you know that, it's probably not surprising that there was a technical quality drop in the same assignment areas. So digital publication, group work, and individual reporting. Individual reporting was the biggest drop. So again, as before, some of the areas that we asked about just weren't relevant because they didn't have those assignments, but you can see on this chart for the most part that there was that instructors considered there was a drop in technical quality. So when you know this, you have to think about things like how can journalism assignments be adjusted for online learning without losing editorial and technical quality? And one thing we want to think about is how do we know that students have access to the tech they need? And this can have further implications for people learning in remote or under-resourced communities. Margaret, you mentioned that some of us have started teaching. I started teaching last week. Last Tuesday was our first day of classes. One of my students just got his Wi-Fi connected today. So he's missed a whole bunch of learning because of that. Some students are having all kinds of technical issues, and it's a steep learning curve. And learning journalism is already hard enough. So we want to consider how we can maybe remove some of those barriers, or at least explore it. So after those sort of more ratings kinds of questions, we asked respondents if they would retain any of the adjustments they made. You know, like you said, it's, and a lot of people are saying it really is an opportunity for positive change as well as just difficulty. So 70% of our respondents indicated that they would keep some of those changes. And so when we looked at their comments, they found that they increased flexibility from faculty was really important to student success, which includes good communication, more relaxed deadlines, and adjustments to those traditional reporting methodologies just to be more flexible in what we accept, because we understand that students can't necessarily work in the way we're used to them working. Also, there were some comments about teaching remote interviewing techniques and how they were very successful because it allowed students to understand how that works in a real newsroom. And many of them said that they would still use these online tools in lesson delivery and student group work because they were they worked really well. But there's the other side of that, which is the negative side. So most respondents said that changes most negatively impacted student performance that should be considered in future. So loss of face-to-face feedback and meeting with instructors, the lack of access to technologies and labs, like I said, that's still a problem for us, even though we were prepared for it all summer. And then internships and work placements and how those are going to work, because they're really important for students to get real world experience. So I would just say, going forward, our areas for future research, I think we want to do follow-up and more qualitative research to see how instructors actually did change their courses this year. So now that it's not an emergency, we've had time to plan, what do those look like? One of the ways we could do that is do a course outline comparison. Just take the course outlines from last fall and compare them with this fall and see what has shifted and then how that worked. And there's also a lot of areas for a study of student perceptions of online learning. I was thinking perhaps you could talk to people who were learning in a regular classroom last year and are now in an online platform. You could get really interesting data for them, or just how the perceptions of new students. So that's a quick summary of it. That's me on the left, and that's Susan, who's somewhere in this Zoom call also. And those are our email addresses. So if you want to get in touch with us, we would be really happy to answer questions, or I just hear what your experience has been also. So thank you for your time and inviting me.
Great, thank you. Fantastic, Jennifer. That was really interesting. I think it'll be really interesting to hear what the experience is like, or how the students feel having lived for 6 months or more in this very different world, where I think we're probably all getting more in tune with doing things online. I think sort of where you finish actually segues really nicely into our next speaker, who is Rachel Younger from Edinburgh.
Right.
And Rachel has been teaching and is going to talk about her experience of really teaching online solely. And so it'll be really interesting to see to hear about your experiences, Rachel, and how that might have changed or not. So hand over to you, Rachel. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. I'm just going to open my screen. Hopefully that will work. Can you guys see me? See the screen, I mean. Okay, can you guys see the slides? Great. So essentially what I'm going to talk about is I've been the program leader of a degree for the last decade that has been online learning. Purely, we have seen the students once a year, but if you look here, you can see essentially some of the countries the students have come from. They've come from roughly 60 plus countries around the world. So we might have a classroom with students in Australia and America and Asia at the same time, which obviously causes also time zone difference issues. The students have been professionals, so they've been working for all sorts of employers, and rather than tell you who, I just put a few logos on the slides. I'm sure I missed some out, but essentially they were mature students. They were at least 22 years old, some of them up to 60 years old. So just quickly, some literature about the value of communities and of the social aspect of learning, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. We realize that student retention in online is really difficult because people feel isolated, and essentially there's a lot of literature that says that if there's collaboration and a sense of belonging, there is better retention and a better student experience. And also, essentially, if there's a shared process of meaning making, there will be deeper levels of learning. And essentially, the thought that even if we look at babies as they grow up, the notion that learning is a collaborative and socially situated process. So that's what I'm going to talk about. How did we do that? And I'm going to go through 4 different aspects. One is how we got students to share information, so not serving it on a silver tablet. One is how we got them to provide each other feedback on their projects. And one is about collaboration, and then other social aspects of community. So I think one of the most important things is that this is my Moodle for one of my theory modules, that right from the beginning, we tell them we greatly value peer-to-peer interaction, and it has to be fun and share some social stuff. You know, are you struggling with your studies and stuff? So share your doubts and your frustrations and be social on what we call the Moodle, which is the interface. So the other thing is that we've made it really simple. If you can see my my structure on my Moodle is extremely simple. It's got week by week, and everything that we do launches from this one-stop shop base. And it's also the place for the social life. So we keep just one place for students to go to, so they've got a home. And so if you look at an example of a week, this is a week about reporting China, you can see that I've got a video lecture with slides, and then I've got this week's debate and this week's reading. So I've opened up a little window on the right. You can see this week's reading. And I don't know if you can see at the bottom here, basically, that the students are commenting. What we said is share your favorite quote. So this is about emotion. It's not just about intellect. So why do these quotes resonate with you emotionally in your life? And students will go, oh, I disagree with this quote and that quote because. So basically we get students hunting for literature, because actually reading ebooks and doing that in isolation is quite difficult. So we make reading academic books a social event. And then we first used to have online debates, and the students told us that essentially, because they were around the world in different time zones, somebody was sleeping when somebody was awake, they wanted to have asynchronous learning. So they were debating in a forum and they weren't really taking part. And we said, we need 2 meaningful comments from you every week on every topic, and they weren't really taking part. And then we decided to make the social aspect assessed. So now students were making video presentations, and this video presentation is amazing. I hope you take time to go on that Vimeo link and watch it after the talk today. This is a student who's basically talking about how we report Hong Kong and how China journalists report Hong Kong, and he's literally done a multimedia show, and he's zoomed in quotes from academic sources and shown his own view and had a debate. And as you can see here on the right, basically the students then very much started debating this over the week and having their views back and forth. And you might notice at the bottom that I only got involved in the debate after a few days, so it's very much student-led debate. And so what this does require is very specific guidelines. I'm just, there's a window covering the bottom of my right, I just anyway. So basically, one of the guidelines that we say is make at least 2 meaningful contributions to each debate. And another thing that we say is that there are no stupid comments or questions. And what we say is what goes on Moodle stays on Moodle. So essentially, you know, it's a bit like Harry in Las Vegas. Yeah, let's just be confidential, because a lot of our students are actually based in totalitarian regimes. So we've had students in Sudan or Zimbabwe or Iran. So also very important, if we're going to be very social and personal and talk about what we're experiencing, then not to go and share that outside. Now, coursework, when it gets to things like producing a cross-platform blog, for example, what we found is it's really important that the students actually give each other feedback on each, you know, little draft of the blog. So every week the students post their most recent draft. On the left, you can see some of those blogs that students have produced. And what they then do is they go, oh, I really like how you did this and that. How did you do it? Or does anybody know how to do this? I'm struggling. And this doesn't take away from the lectures. We give them a wealth of lectures and tell them what we think. And we also give them feedback. But by giving each other feedback, they're also getting the round the world cross-culturally different feedback. So they're getting different views on their work from different world regions and different preferences, which is really good for them, that they're not only hearing our feedback. So this makes it really social. And if we have to go away for a week's holiday or something, the students continue to teach each other, which I'm not saying you can do all term, but essentially it is something that the students get used to. So basically, this is a documentary film module, and you might think teaching documentary film online without a technician might be really difficult, where you've got studios and you show them how to use the kit. So what we do is we break down the learning journey into week by week steps. This week, you're going to learn how to film visual sequences. And what we do is, you can see on the right, we say, please post a little short visual sequence here that you filmed maybe with your iPhone, and please post what kit are you using and what struggles do you have with the kit you're using. And students are then going, oh, I love the kit you've got, or oh, that's a good idea. So basically we see these short little video sequences, and we can test early on, because they're alone and they don't have as much feedback in the room. We can test early on, are you actually struggling with the little small tasks that are going to build up to the bigger tasks? So by the end of the module, so this is a bigger example of students talking to each other about kit, and you can see somebody said he's going to use his private DSLR camera, and there was 21 posts about how could we do this, why, how, what. So these students basically are actually teaching us lecturers something new, and they're innovating the use of kit that's available, because every year, as you know, the technology moves on. So that's the social value, is that we don't just teach them stuff, they teach us stuff too. And at the end of term, before submission, we get them to definitely share their drafts as well. And on the left here is a film that a student just put forward just 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then all the students then posted their feedback. And on the right, you can see an example of a student in Sudan, and she filmed the Green Square in Sudan, and all the students from around the world who'd never been to Sudan were like, oh, this is what stood out to me. And she had a very different way of telling her story. It was far more poetic and not as factual as it might have been in Britain. And that was really nice to see the feedback that the students gave her, that they quite like this poetic journalism. So that's one of those things. And students actually, because they're comfortable with each other, dare each other to be quite daring. So we've had a lot of students have actually made the first film in their life with their iPhones maybe, and they've actually commissioned it for money. So this is a film that was commissioned by a child fund that, in Indonesia. Now, we started developing more and more social as we went on, and I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 examples. One was that placements were very lonely and the students weren't really sharing with each other. And one of our students said, I don't want to write a video diary, I want to create, I don't want to write a written diary that only the tutors read, I want to create a video diary. And we realized, yes, let's do this for all the students and then share it. And as you can see here, this is one of our students, and he's at home doing some video journalism in the bottom screen. And then in the top left, he's gone to BBC World because he wants to become a foreign correspondent rather than a local correspondent. And then accidentally, he ended up during the Bataclan, he ended up in Paris. He was sent to Paris. So he actually not only reported live from Paris, he filmed himself reporting live from Paris for the other students to see how he did it. And so all our students now actually share their placements as a video diary for the other students. So it's not just that they give it to us, the teachers, they share it with everybody on the course. And it's that shared element. So here's another one. This is one of our students who was a sports presenter at Al Jazeera, and he was experimenting with new ways to do his sports journalism. He was experimenting with the use of a video wall. So he was innovating practice on his placement. And he actually interviewed his placement supervisor at Al Jazeera, talking about him, telling him what he liked about this placement and the goals he'd set himself. So we got to, rather than read a kind of like an appraisal, like we used to do, we were actually watching an appraisal, which was really nice. And so were the other students. So the other students got tips on how to get your manager to notice what you're doing. So that shared experience is a really important one. The other one is we do live global newsrooms in a global virtual cross-platform newsroom. In the beginning, we were going to set up a newsroom for the students, and what we then decided was we'd let the students set up their own newsroom. So this is an example of journalists around the world talking about their childhood in different countries. In 2015, they did one about the Millennium Goals and ending poverty. And of course, this year, the students actually set up their own newsroom, and they did a collaboration on COVID. And it was really amazing, the angles on COVID right around the world and all the continents, to see how that worked. And I think the important thing is that we've got debating, we've got giving people feedback on each other's work, and here we've got sharing an experience. And the nice thing is we've done some research into it that I'll put it in the slides for those who want, but I can't talk about it. But we've done some research into the cross-cultural wealth of knowledge that people gain by experiencing how other people in other countries work. So everybody has a different approach. So very different approaches to doing journalism, and to actually just experience it and not learn about it has been very nice. So one of the main lessons that I would say that we've learned is when you use technology, it has to serve, not to complicate. The technology has to be what the students want to use, make it simple, don't make it high tech, make it really simple, and the technology has to serve the purpose. And what we also learned is we used to record video lectures in our offices, and that became a bit dry. And what we then started doing is doing events. So once a year, we asked the students, do you want to come for an event? And if they said yes, we organized an event. So it might be an investigative journalism week, it might be a research methodologies for practice research week, it might be going to Parliament week, it might be future Proofing Your Global Media Career Week, so freelancing. So every year we started organizing these live events, and we would just film the lectures that would fit in with our curriculum, but they would also be a social event. And I would say that only 50% of the students ever came, but the other 50%, we'd meet them at graduation, and they would say that we felt that these events did make it more social. So obviously in COVID times, we can't do that. So that's obviously a challenge, but we felt that that worked really well. So obviously, just to round up, the alumni community, I think, is really important. So we do have an alumni community on Facebook that we keep private, because a lot of our journalists are in countries where they could get in trouble for being known to be journalists. So we keep the community. So obviously over the years, the community grows and people continue to give each other tips. And just to say that I think it's really important that you clearly outline your rules of engagement. So the confidentiality, the peer-to-peer interaction, 2 meaningful posts a week. So create ground rules, whatever suits you for ground rules. And the other thing is that you basically facilitate, you're a facilitator of community, and to facilitate flexible and simple learning patterns, and ask the students what's working for them. I think we all do that. And maybe the last one, we have felt that if we do knowledge sharing amongst everybody, the community of learners, rather than knowledge export, where the only experts and everybody else is the taker, then the students will learn from each other. And we've done some surveys, and I've got them in the end of the slides, and I can share them with you if you want. We've done quite an extensive list of surveys. And just to say, students have learned from each other how journalism can be different around the globe. And I mean, this applies even if you've only got UK students in your online classroom. I'm sure it's the same. Students will learn from each other, and the students say they love the fact that they can learn from others. So essentially that's a take that I have taken from the last decade, is that I have learned as much from my students as they've learned from me, I'm sure. And my students tend to end up, of course, we've got to remain a kind of like a strict slight distance whilst we're lecturing, but afterwards, the alumni community, these students tend to really stay friends forever. And I know that happens in the physical classroom as well. But I believe that community can remain just as warm and hearty and friendly and close if you've never met the person. So sometimes I feel like I've met the person, and at graduation I think, oh, I've never met you, but I feel like I've known you for years. So that's something that I think is to take away, that community and social interaction can be just as strong. Fine. Okay, thanks for tuning in. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. That was fascinating, Rachel. Already you've given me some ideas, and I saw that some of my colleagues that I teach with were online earlier, and I'm thinking, oh, we need to change how we're doing reflective essays. We need to have them doing videos. So I think that'll be something I'll be discussing with colleagues when we next speak. So thank you so much. Now we go to Alan Gear, and Alan, similar to Rachel, has been teaching students who are really quite far away from him, predominantly in China. And so I'm sure he's got some shared experience that Rachel's just talked about. So Alan, it's over to you.
Okay, smashing. Thank you. Good morning, everybody from lockdown Northumberland. It's lovely to get out, even if it's only to see you guys virtually. So I'll just fiddle with the screen a minute and then we'll get going. Okay, we in action? Yes, okay. China, COVID, and the unintended consequences of lockdown teaching. I'm, just by way of a bit of background, some of you will know me, there's lots of nice friends here. I teach international journalism at Guangdong University of Foreign Studies in Guangzhou, which is Canton in old money, 100 miles north of Hong Kong, huge city, 14 million people. Have a wonderful challenge to do journalism there, and I've been lucky to be around a bit and doing all sorts of things, and I'm still proud to be Young Journalist of the Year from 1976, so it gives you an idea of how old I am. I'm going to run through some of the lessons that we've learned from teaching via Zoom in this, this format like we're doing here, a lot of it will be familiar to you, but I think it's worth reiterating, because some of the things that at one end we might be forgetting what it's like at the other end. So attendance does not necessarily equal engagement. I have no problem with attendance. The Chinese students are very well behaved. They always turn up at the right place at the right time. And I get them to turn the cameras on and the microphones when they start the class, and they have to say hello, and I make sure they're. However, a lot of them are working with very poor internet connections, and a quick dodge out of it is get them to turn the video off, which makes it much easier for them. So I've no guarantee that anybody's still there once they've turned everything off. A little trick, using the Zoom chat that we've been using today, ping out a question, all right, and get an instant answer from them, and then you can very quickly see who's there. My classes are between 20 and 25, so I can pretty quickly gauge who's there and who's not there, and the ones that aren't there, I can go chasing after them. Not everyone has a space to work. It's been interesting, isn't it? We're all looking behind. I can see some wonderful bookcases and some lovely music and all the rest of it. A lot of these guys don't have a space to work. A lot of Chinese students live in small homes with lots of other people, and the idea of having a discrete space to work is an anathema to them. Once, you know, on the bus, it's the only place that they can find that they actually be on their own, so they can sit on the bus with the phone. I've done a lot of teaching in a lot of places. I never taught on a bus before. So, interruptions as well, frequent. What do you want for dinner? You know, it's all happening in the background. And one guy, his mum comes to every class, and she just sits there next to him. I don't mind, anybody can come, I'm up for it. And social interaction needs hard work. Chinese students are not natural great collaborators. Getting them to engage in the classroom is hard enough. Getting them to engage with each other, let alone with the teacher. You know, we all know what it's like in classes, the naughty boys at the back who sit around chatting all the time. I dream of that. I'd love to have that. I don't have that. I have lots of people dutifully waiting for their intravenous injection of learning, and they're not happy with engaging with each other. The Zoom breakout groups has been a real help to me. Anybody who's used them, you can divide the class up into any number of groups along the way. And so therefore, it makes a random group. So you get rid of all the little cliquey things. Bang, I've got a class of 21, I'll do 7 groups of 3, off you go, here's a task, and then you can jump in it as well. It's a little bit clunky, but you can jump into the group along the way. A 10-minute session. I'm always coming up with stories. They're not great at coming up with stories, but I find the stories and say, here we go. You know, so we had a big story about driverless taxis in Guangzhou. And so 10 minutes, first couple of minutes, hey, how are you doing? There's nothing wrong with that. All right. So make sure that you're working on the social interaction of things. And in the middle of their lockdown, in sort of March, April time, a lot of them were literally indoors 24/7. So this was an occasion where they could actually have a bit of a lifeline of normality. So, well, here's my challenge. Hold on, I'm just moving the screen out of the way. So trying to give these young people an appreciation of plurality of the media. They had no concept of plurality of the media at all, okay? It's a state-controlled media, TV, newspapers, online, right? So it's a big conjuring trick for people like me to try and get them to realize that there's more than one view coming out. The available news, Central TV, China News Service, things that you will have known, Xinhua, which is the agency, a sort of PA for China, a Global Times, they're all under control of the Chinese Communist Party. So they're all going to have the same thing. Only out there giving an alternative view, social media, unregulated blogs and websites, which frankly don't bear a lot of looking at, all right? Full of the usual old rubbish that you get online, and even more so in China. So an obvious way to open our eyes and minds is every lesson starts with, let's look at some international journalism, all right? However, from China, I've got no Google, I've got no YouTube, I've got none of the things that we would normally have as a go-to. BBC, oh, let's ping out that video from the BBC. No, let's not. We're not able to do it. So working in China, as I was last year, is a real challenge. So responsibilities for us as teachers, all right, for the students, they can go and get a VPN. Some of you will have come across working in other countries, which will bypass, will get your computer to pretend that you're somewhere else, okay? It's not really an option, all right, because you're not supposed to do it. And so the students feel threatened if you're going to ask them to do that. So I wouldn't ask them to do that along the way. So here, sitting in my lovely room in Northumberland, I've got access to everything. Here's the China Daily Twitter feed, and this is the sort of hard-hitting journalism that they're putting out, all right? So the China Daily Twitter is a mix of cute cats and an hour and a half of President Xi giving a talk to someone, all right? They're, in terms of journalism, interpreting, analysing almost nothing, all right? But interestingly, that's not available to the students even, because Twitter is not available in China. So the compromise, I'm sat here, I've got all the toys to play with, I just have to watch out, okay? Do not use anything that is overtly anti-China. I'm not censoring here, I'm just being sensible, all right? Because if you go online and you look, a lot of the stuff is very anti-China, a lot of it inflamed by Mr. Trump, all right? So you've got to watch out. Use the trusted sources, BBC, CNN, Reuters, they are go-to for me, and also explain the context of the international media approach. How are they doing that along the way? We had the two biggest stories, global news stories in the world on our doorstep, the pandemic starting in China and the unrest in Hong Kong. And it was impossible for me as a hard-bitten old hack to ignore those stories, okay? So we had to go in, we had to be very careful about the way we did it. So just to finish up, this is the Zoom screen that you'll always see. This is a poll. I don't know if any of you have used the poll facility within Zoom. You can pose a question and the students, they've only got, it's a multiple choice thing, they've just got a quick answer, but it's a great engagement tool. So this one was about writing about numbers. So I came up with 3 or 4 questions and they just had to be thinking about what they're doing. So I think the presentations this morning have been fantastic, some wonderful research. My research is much more back of an envelope, and an in-class survey I just did, how's it all going, guys? And here's the last word from George Chen. I love the online classes. The quality of teaching is really not as good as real classroom teaching. Oh well, that's me told. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Alan, in your own inimitable style. Again, I think you raise a really interesting point, which I think is is probably something that we're all thinking about, is, you know, the sources that we're using and what we're sharing, and what we are empowering our students to share as well, and the things that we want them to think about and behave like in class. So I think that, you know, there's some really useful stuff there. Next so thank you, Alan. Can I ask, I think there are some people who don't have their mics unmuted, and I think some people are getting some feedback. So if you could just make sure that you've unmuted, that you've muted your mic while our speakers are talking, that would be great, thank you. So up next we have Gail Mellors and Raj Shukla from Nottingham Trent Uni. And they're going to be talking about something that we know is a thorny issue for all of us. And in fact, I would like to poll you all, and we should have set up a poll. Alan's just made me think about that. It's been suggested to me that we run maybe a workshop one afternoon on how we run news days. So I'd quite like to get people's views on that, maybe before the end, and that might be something we could do in a few weeks' time, maybe an hour or so on a Wednesday afternoon, just before we all really dive back into them. But maybe Gail and Raj are about to solve all of our problems on how to run online news days. So with that huge responsibility on your shoulders, I now hand over to Gail.
I'll just attempt to share the screen. Are you seeing that? Yeah, okay. I'm going to slide. Okay, so yes, Raj and I both work at Nottingham Trent University. We are practitioners, having enjoyed long careers predominantly working for ITV in the regions. So Raj is with me as well. We'll attempt to do this as a two-handed presentation. So Raj, for the next slide.
Right, the scope of our research was basically looking at programmes and then getting reporters, crews, newsroom managers to answer questionnaires. So it was really interesting watching programmes, you know, very intently and looking at all the different things that various programmes were doing. One of the first things that was noticed when reviewing the programmes was obviously it was a one issue dominated the programmes for very, very months. What was also really obvious was that changes to working were implemented really, really quickly. Most staff were sent home and they were told to work from home. And we all remember Robert Peston doing his pieces to camera from his study. In terms of programming, the national programming is single-handed anyway, but the regional programs are usually double-handed, and that all changed. It went down to a single presenter. In the ITV regions, all the regional opts were dropped. We all got used to seeing lots of Skype-style lives into programs, into packages, seeing empty streets and beaches and things, using helicopter and drone footage. There was lots of setups, and this is one of my favourites because it's so complicated, illustrating reporters' social distancing. Now, we heard from our questionnaires that viewers actually wanted to see this. This is why we got so much of it, that viewers wanted to see that reporters were social distancing when they were out interviewing. There was lots of setups with remote interviewing as well, laptops, etc., filming in empty gardens, a lot fewer location lives, especially in the regions, and that's because of the problems with satellite trucks. Again, lots of user-generated content, whole packages built out of user-generated content. But this did lead to some fears from what we heard from our respondents, that they were worried about people who didn't have technology and not being able to get to those people. And I have to say, by the end of looking at various programs, the packages all did look very similar. There was lots of social distancing.
Okay, so our respondents were also reporters, as Raj mentioned, and managers from newsrooms, and they highlighted the negatives, particularly from reporters, was that limitation on filming sequences and being able to illustrate stories obviously because they were so limited to locations and so limited to things that they could do, weren't obviously allowed to go into homes or have close contact with people. The time that they had to allow and build into their filming to choreograph interviews to allow for social distancing, and perhaps also to direct some of their interviewees, and also the difficulties caused by the need for crews to distance from each other, so that would be reporters and crews. And we had one wonderful anecdote from a BBC regional journalist describing how she would sit to record her voiceover for her package remotely in her own car, using a microphone on a very long lead, which was then thread through the window of her vehicle across a parking space to the vehicle of the crew van. So they had to work very ingeniously, and mother being necessity being the mother of all invention, had to come up with lots of different ways of working on the spot. The negatives also came through from the respondents, particularly the concerns around safety, dealing with unpredictable members of the public. One crew sent to Leicester after the second wave in Leicester and the lockdown that followed, reported actually having to turn around and come away because they were met with people who were very frustrated, were remonstrating and complaining to them, perhaps not aggressively, but getting too close, not observing that social distance, and they were very mindful of that. And you can't control crowds in those circumstances, so essentially they had to pull out without the story. Awareness of limitations as well, as Raj referred to. One respondent talked about filming with a young mum with an autistic young child in a high-rise block of flats in Hull, and she was very keenly aware that to get the package, not only did she have the Skype interview from this young mum using her phone, but she was directing the footage that she needed, getting the mum to film the close quarters they were living in, the little boy running around, unable to go out and use the playground, getting very frustrated, the lift broken. So she was directing those sequences, that footage that she needed. But of course, that was reliant to get that material on the young mum's connectivity, and she was on a pay-as-you-go phone, so she was very conscious that she was actually asking her to spend a lot of money in order to tell her story. So the frustrations, therefore, awareness, therefore, that actually the digital divide was being exposed in certain communities, and those stories were very difficult to tell under those circumstances. And then, of course, because journalists were having to work very quickly, change their practices overnight without warning, without training, making up as they went along, that obviously was quite frustrating as well, that need to adapt quickly to technologies. But there were positives reported. The less time spent, needing to travel long distances to go for those interviews that they were now able to get from over Skype or Skype style platforms, meant that there was more time to research. Sitting from home, trawling social media enabled them to gather that user-generated content and dig out those personal stories, which led to many people-rich packages and stories told from personal perspectives, particularly in the regions. And as we've said, it was a single issue that dominated the news agenda. So newsrooms were looking every day at new ways and new angles for that same story, which led to them digging out different perspectives and approaching different people to have different voices from the community as well. One producer talked about leaving no stone unturned in their efforts to tell how COVID was affecting everyone across the region. And of course, reporters, as we all know, the best thing about the job is to tell those uplifting stories, and those stories championing the NHS and also how communities came together to help each other and support each other were very enjoyable and very appreciated as well by viewers. The crews, obviously at the forefront, also were worried about that unpredictability of crowds and members of the public. And one anecdote shared with us was when a cameraman from Yorkshire Television was sent out to film a house fire. When he got there, the street was full of onlookers, and he couldn't get close enough to the house without actually having to walk through the crowd. So his news desk, when he described that scene, told him to pull out. And actually they ended up using the footage filmed on iPhones that appeared on social media of the people actually there, rather than that professional crew's pictures, because he just didn't get any. They reported there was no real change to their daily pattern or working hours, because obviously, you know, camera operators for a long time have been dispatched from home on to jobs, but they were very aware of so many people being furloughed and sitting at home while they felt that they were being sent out on the front line. That was a predominant theme that came through from some of our respondents, from the crews at least. They also obviously were very keenly aware of the time and care and responsibility they had to spend to keep their equipment clean in order to keep themselves and their reporters safe, and wearing a face mask all day obviously was a challenge. Managers loved the fact that despite the initial fears that TV would become rip and read, it never actually happened, because of those that availability really of user-generated content. The impetus to use new technologies meant that they found them overnight. A wonderful tool called No Machine helped the regions, helped reporters edit from home, because they could virtually take over a news cutter in the newsroom on their laptop at home. Everyone adapted very quickly to all these new technologies. It led to cost savings in terms of travel and time, and this allowed much richer and much fuller and much more comprehensive meetings online, where reporters were having input to planning, having input to treatment meetings, because they had the time to do it from home. And so it led to greater collaboration and greater working relationships between news editors and producers and reporters. Managers noticed that, which I found very interesting, being on the other end of that. And of course, that interaction and appreciation that they were getting daily from members of the public. At a time like this, I think regional news really comes into its own, because people were certainly turning to our regional services, wanting to know the latest about how it was, what was happening in their own region close to home, and how people around them was coping with it as well. And as you can see there, viewing figures, not surprisingly, went through the roof across all services. There were, but of course, negatives. The managers very keenly aware of the responsibility of keeping people safe. They had to risk assess every job and every aspect of the operation. And one of the other main negatives in terms of programming, they very keenly, well, they did miss those face-to-face studio-based interviews where you can really interrogate someone, you can really get to nitty-gritty of issues. Not in the same way over Skype, when that remote connection, it's almost a barrier to doing that. And of course, there are fears of how this will play out in the coming months, because as winter comes in, it'll be less easy to do set-up shots in gardens and in parks and on park benches and achieve that social distancing out in the open when it's throwing down, when the weather turns. So we are obviously considering future implications for industry.
Yes, and one of the things that we have found is that managers especially are now keener on remote working, which is a bit of a turnaround. They are keener for reporters to work from home, to work remotely from the newsroom. They've also found that viewers don't mind Skype, Zoom, those sorts of interviews. And that's going to continue, especially where access is hard. And so you won't be sending your crews or your satellite truck out halfway across the region just because you need a vox pop from deepest Lincolnshire. There have been other implications, obviously, for the industry. Mid-pandemic, the BBC regional office announced massive cuts. They're going to cut 7 of the 20 presenters for the 6:30 regional programmes. They're also changing inside out, so that very many reporters, regional reporters, in places like Nottingham and Plymouth, will no longer have anywhere to do current affairs. There is, according to our questionnaires, still some unease over the creativity and the quality content of programming. There's some unease over if newsrooms are slimmed down? Will reporters have less time to film and edit? And will we then be absolutely completely reliant on UGC and remote interviewing? And what does that mean in terms of inclusivity? So, the implications for our teaching. Do our students who are digital natives, much more than us, have any appreciation of how the new normal is to how things were done before? Do they have any appreciation of the importance of professionally filmed and edited footage? And does it really matter? Really, this comes down to the curation versus generation debate. There is a large amount of UGC on social media that students can use. They can direct users remotely, as reporters have been doing, to film content themselves. They are absolutely happy with Zoom type quality on interviews. I mean, students are loath to even pick up the phone. So how do we make them go out and actually talk to people? How do we teach them that professionally filmed and edited footage looks better? And do we teach them professional methods first and then show them the shortcuts, or actually show them what's currently being done?
So obviously, with those questions very much in the forefront of our minds, we've got to balance them with the need to be very conscious of health and safety. So our major concern going forward is, of course, as journalists, as key workers, are out in the community because we need to know what's happening in society, hold authoritative account, that, you know, their job goes on regardless. That's very difficult to argue as an imperative for students who are training to be journalists rather than actually fulfilling that public service remit. So is it responsible of us to even be considering at this stage to be asking them to be news gathering during the pandemic and contacting members of the public and going out and about? Obviously, we're going to attempt to do that because we all know there's only one way to learn, and that's by doing. So we're very much looking at modelling our teaching, taking a lead from the research that we've done on industry practice as it stands now. We will be having to risk assess every job, every assignment, every teaching, every learning task. We are already been devising extra sessions to cover industry practice and protocols and guidance. One idea we've had is to actually, once we've delivered all of this new know-how, is then to place an online quiz up for students to take, and if they don't pass it, they can't get access to the equipment, which I think is one way of ensuring ourselves that they've got that health and safety message loud and clear. We're very concerned, of course, and I think previous presenters have mentioned in their presentations of how, you know, we achieve inclusivity and fairness for all of our learners when some of them will have lots of high tech and great connectivity, others will not. That's quite a costly exercise to consider, to make sure that everyone has the same access to edit softwares and reliable connections to engage in newsroom activities remotely. Obviously, there's different universities with different approaches currently, but where does it leave us, therefore, as frontline educators, with those huge cost implications at a time when recruitment, particularly internationally, is falling? We've already seen some job losses in some universities. In our institution, obviously, they were very cautious over budgets, but actually we've managed to recruit way above our target, which means we're now scrambling for extra accommodation, room in the timetable, staffing, and etc. All of that workload falls on frontline staff. So changing industry and changing practices, our research points to, well, indicates to how that may play out. It's still to be seen. Obviously, we can make educated guesses about that, and we're mimicking, well, modelling our teaching along those lines. Obviously, it's very important that we continue to monitor it. Also, we're very keenly aware of the importance of continuing to attract and enthuse young talent into a job, a role, a discipline that at the moment, you know, is surrounded by notions of an industry in decline. We're also very keenly aware that journalism, we're all aware, has never been more important as PR of politics shift and MPs, councils, governments turn to social media as their outlet for their PR and message and engagement with the public, bypassing often journalists. We are well-trained and tenacious journalists have never been needed more than they are now to actually hold those people to account. All of these are not new challenges, we're aware, but certainly COVID, we feel, has amplified them. So as we look to the year ahead, we're aware this is going to lead to a huge increase in our workload and our responsibilities to our students. We're, of course, a very limited window, have we not, to turn our teaching around, maybe secure the necessary levels of staffing and equipment. And of course, therefore, it's so important that we come together within platforms and spheres like this to make use of our shared knowledge and experience and industry contacts. So thanks AJE for allowing us this time to share, and maybe we can have a conversation about it now.
Great, thank you, Raj and Gail. I think you both raised some really interesting points. Raj, you mentioned a point about, you know, the viewers enjoying seeing, you know, how the reporters were getting round social distancing. And I've long thought that perhaps if we as an industry let people see a wee bit more just how difficult it is to actually produce news of a very good content, maybe people would be more understanding of the really challenging job that we do. So I think that was really interesting that you raised that. Now, such good papers. I just want to thank everyone. We have, in true AJE style, run over, and we have actually run right through our discussion time. So while I don't really want to stifle discussion, because I certainly don't, I'm conscious as well that people have probably been sitting now for over an hour and maybe want to stop and get a coffee, which is exactly self-interested on my part, because I would like to do that. But we've got maybe say 5 minutes, and then we can stop and have a 5-minute coffee break so that we can start again at 11:45. So does anybody have anything they would like to ask? If so, please raise your hand, put it in the chat, or just unmute and shout out. I think that, you know, we all probably know each other well enough to do that. And if not, then I'm quite happy to ask some questions.
Can I ask one?
Yes, go for it.
I can't help thinking that when the world goes back to normal, that nothing will be the same again, etc., etc. So what I'm trying to do, and you know, would appreciate any advice on this, is to convince the students that they have to move. They have to, what's the word, pivot. That they cannot just sit there and expect it to be like it was before, because when they go out into the workforce, whatever job they're doing, you know, the Zoom call, the Zoom conference is going to be the way that all work. You know, there's always going to be an element of that in any job that they do. So I'd appreciate anybody who's got any comments. I mean, maybe Alan has comments about how to actually persuade students that they need to be engaging with this rather than sitting there with their camera turned off.
I think it's a good point, Alan. I think, you know, that notion of normality, and I don't know how anybody else feels, but sometimes to me that feels quite overwhelming, the fact the world is just changing so fast, so quickly. And I think for students, I know that is quite challenging, just having spoken to some over the last few weeks. But maybe Alan does have something that he could add.
I could perhaps come in there. I think because most of these changes, particularly in our industry, are going to be technologically driven. I think actually young people are better placed to cope with it than maybe, you know, we feel or recognise that they are. I see within my own home, I've got teenagers. They seem to be adapting incredibly well, you know, to not having so much contact with their friends and not having so many social liberties. And I think, well, I'm ever the optimist. I'm hoping that those adaptations will be made to teaching methods, as well as to, you know, equip them to go out into industries and jobs. I think they are quite adept at pivoting, I think was the phrase.
Jennifer, you were saying that you've already started teaching, so you're maybe a few weeks ahead of most of us. How have you found your students responding as they've come back to a new semester where they know that things are going to be different?
I think overall there is an attitude of sort of like, we're all doing this together. And I think there is some generosity in terms of understanding that it's a bit bumpy. But I think one thing that has happened that I was not expecting is I teach my class over Zoom. And so there's Zoom, and then we have an online learning portal. And yesterday, or rather last week for my first class, the online learning portal was down for the whole day. So your class that you've planned, that you're going to show them where all the things are and how the modules are divided and how, you know, give them the run through. It's like, well, that's not something I could do. So, you know, talking about adaptation, it's like, okay, so it's kind of like you go into a classroom and your PowerPoint is broken. You're like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to talk to you for an hour and we're going to ad lib. And so I think what I wasn't expecting, I mean, I just wasn't expecting there to be so many technical hiccups now, considering that everyone has had so much time. You know, the server that the media sits on broke down, and then something else broke down, and they've been very good about just sort of adapting and going with the flow. But in return for that, we have to be more flexible and saying, you know, you can have an extension, or the time that I would normally give you to do this assignment is 1 week. I'm going to give you 2 weeks now, because I now recognize that it takes you so much longer to upload that to the platform rather than just sending it to me or putting it in a Dropbox. So I hope that it will stay like that. But I know from another university where I teach, I'll just say quickly that there have been some students who've decided that they were just going to defer this year because they didn't want, they started the classes and they were like, nope, not for me. I'm just going to wait until next year when things get a bit more normal. So I think that could also happen.
Good. We also
Well, just come in, please, Margaret. Just very quickly, one thing to do is a bit of self-examination. Realise what you can and you can't do. For people, my teaching style is somewhere between stand-up comedian and old-style newspaper editor, which doesn't translate very well within this environment. So I'm having to do probably 2-3 times as much prep for the class as I would do normally, because I normally just come in and say, hey guys, have a look at this. I can't do that. So I've had to learn very, very quickly. I've got to put more effort into the bits I'm not very good at, but also don't lose what I bring to the party as well. So give yourself a bit of a self-examination and see what you can do. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Alan. So we've got 2 questions, maybe 2 points. Fred Mudhai, Fred, you've got a question. Do you want to chip in with that?
Yes, I think the question also relates to one that I'm seeing on the chat. It's about ethics, and Fiona's point also about risk assessment. Mm-hmm. For Rachel and for Gail, I don't know what you gathered with regard to ethical considerations with students filming all over, as well as the practitioners and ethical issues that they might have faced, because increasingly universities are becoming very cagey about ethics.
Yeah. Can I maybe talk to that? Basically, my microphone, basically we had a student in Sudan who reported back from her placement, and she got beaten up by the police for being out reporting a story. So essentially, from that day onwards, and that was probably the first year we were delivering, we've realized that when you do online, risk assessment has to be a far bigger topic than when it's in the classroom. So in the classroom, people don't get a camera before they've done their risk assessment. But if people are at home using whatever kit they have, because they're around the globe somewhere else, then we literally take the students through maybe 2 or 3 hours of teaching them about risk assessment and staying safe. And we expect the students to basically report back to us. So part of the assessment for us is there is a risk assessment that is returned to us, and they're not supposed to go out before filing a risk assessment with us. But it's more about the mentality. It's telling people, because in Britain we've got a huge mentality. And I must say, I was a Swiss TV correspondent working in Iraq before I came to Britain to teach, and I never did a risk assessment in my life before I came to Britain and started teaching. So essentially it's a cultural mentality that we just have to get the students used to thinking, I will do, and we do not only physical but also emotional risk assessment. So am I going to endanger myself emotionally with what I'm doing. So we do both. And it's just basically something that you have to make a lecture topic before you send students out, I think. It's really important. And it's far, far, far more important when people, you know, I was having a big argument with one of my students who was going to Syria. And she was like, I don't need to fill in these forms. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you're not going to get the grade if you don't fill in these forms. And I know you're a seasoned reporter, but I am not letting you go to Syria without filling in these forms. It's what we do in Britain, and you're a student in Britain now, even though you're based in, you know, Turkey, North Kurdistan, and going into Syria. And I'm sorry, you're going to have to fill this in. So it's about our attitude. We just have to set expectations and make people take this seriously. And they will, that, you know, if you assess them on it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Fiona, that chimed in with the point you were making, but I think it's probably something that we probably need to have a longer conversation about collectively, about how we're managing that, and how we're imagining it, maybe about advice and guidance people could share in the chat as we go through. I'm going to stop us now. Sorry to cut you off, Fiona. Did you have something else you wanted to ask, or is that kind of erased the point you? Yeah, great, thank you. Can I just say thank you so much to all of our speakers this morning. I think everybody's just provided us with so much insight into their experiences and into the sort of things that we're all thinking about at the moment. So thanks to Jennifer, Rachel, Gail, Raj and Alan. Really great papers as always. Can we maybe stop now for a coffee break? So it's 1:45, say maybe 10 minutes. We're going to run on again in true AJE style. But if we maybe stop, we start again at 11:55, and that will just give everyone a chance to have a coffee, have a quick comfort break, nip outside. There's sunshine in Glasgow today, so if I could, I would be sitting outside at the moment, and see everybody at 11:55 for the start of the second session. I really want to warmly welcome our second session of speakers. And again, we're really lucky that we have some people who are joining us from different parts of the world, and we really appreciate them either staying up very late or getting up very early. Particularly our colleagues from Brazil, Barbara Emanuel, Melina de la Barrera Aires, and Juliana Frier Bezerra. I've probably really brutally spoiled your names there, so I do apologise. Also in this session, I want to thank our moderator in the chat, Deborah Wilson-David. She will be looking for comments from everybody as we go through. And also in this session, helping us out, because we have some colleagues from Brazil who have invited some of their students along to watch. And the wonderful Ivana Abel from Derby, who I'm sure most of you know, is going to help us out in case there are any issues around just understanding what we're saying. So thank you so much, Ivana. She is she's almost part of the shadow cabinet of the AJE, and we're delighted to have her help. So thank you so much, Ivana. So we're going to start really promptly. I think one of the things we probably need to think about for AJE conferences in future is giving you all more time to talk, because everybody has so many interesting things to say, and we're really cruel to make you only talk for 10 minutes. So if we work on the basis that we're here until 1 o'clock, that means people can have some extra time if they need it. I don't really want to be holding up bits of paper saying stop, stop, stop. But if we could, as far as we can, stick to the 10 minutes or thereabouts, and that will give us some time for some discussion at the end. If people do feel they want to go on, that's absolutely fine. We just then know that maybe we don't have as much time at the end, because I know that people, I'm very conscious, people have other commitments, and we do want to try and finish just before 1 o'clock. So we're going to start with Barbara. Hello, Barbara. Welcome to AJE. It's lovely to have you here. I think you were here for our June conference online, so it's so good to hear you present, and so good to know that the AJE is reaching beyond the UK. So thank you so much for submitting your paper, to all of our colleagues for doing that today, and I'm going to hand over to you, Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and I think good evening in Canada, I'm not sure, and hello everyone. thank you, the AJE and everyone for welcoming us, because it's not every country where we can find an association where we can share this kind of experiences. So it's been really helpful for me to attend the conference and now sharing with you. So let me try and share my screen. I hope you can see it all right. So I'm gonna talk about the challenges and the solutions that I found while reimagining a course that I teach about visual communication that I've been teaching, of course, in class, in person, and now I had to change it for online learning, but especially considering the needs of the low-income students. We've seen that it's something that happens all over the world. We've seen examples from China, and so it's really a problem here in Brazil. So I'm going to talk about it. First, let me tell you what I am. I'm in Brazil, so more specifically in the southeast of Brazil. So part of my accent, if you don't understand what I say, please ask questions or stop me. I teach at a city called Niterói, a university called Universidade Federal Fluminense. It's pretty big. We are in 9 different cities and 60,000 students in total, and around 40,000 in the bachelor undergrad level. And so Niterói, I believe most of you never heard of Niterói, but it's across the bay from Rio. That's where I am right now. I believe you probably know Rio. And as many of my students, I take the ferry and cross the bay every day to work. It's a beautiful ride. I highly recommend it if you come to Rio. But I strongly recommend you do it, but I hardly recommend you come here now because it's really not safe here. And Brazil is one of the countries most affected by the COVID-19 pandemics. We are number 2 in cases and deaths, but behind only the United States. And then India has more cases now, I believe, but comparing the populations, we have a much smaller population than both India and the US. So you can see that our problem is really deep. So since mid-March, we are in social isolation. So universities must close. So no in-class learning. But it's not the same for everyone, because in private colleges around here, most students have broadband internet connection. So since day 1, they have been having online classes, no problem for them. Of course, a lot of problems for the teachers who had literally a weekend to prepare. They have been struggling with that. But in public universities, that is my case, all of them are 100% tuition free and have a lot of affirmative action programs. So I have a lot of students coming from underprivileged backgrounds. So it was a problem. We couldn't start with online classes if we didn't know if they could access. And even those students who had a broadband internet connection, no problem at all, they said, we're not starting without them, without those who cannot start, because we don't want to widen the gap of inequality, which I agree, it's a problem. So we had to find out, how is the internet connection? Do they have laptops? Are they working full time to support their families? Because many people lost their jobs. Do they have appropriate learning spaces? So we had to know all of the things before we started. So the university decided to conduct an online survey, and the results were great. It's okay. Almost every student has good internet connection. No, yay. It didn't take us long, though, to realize that the survey could only reach those with good internet connection. The ones we needed to reach the most, we didn't reach. So online survey was not a good idea. So we arranged conversations with some of these low-income students with the help of the student council. They were great during this process. So I had a few of one-on-one conversations and a few conversations with small groups. So I had some answers to those questions. So I found out that many students had either low bandwidth connections or prepaid SIM card connections. So they could connect only with their phones. And some were living in areas where the broadband service could not reach, it was not available for them. Even if you wanted to pay for the internet, they couldn't have it. Some of them had only one desktop per family, so they had to share with siblings and parents working at home. But most of them have their personal phone. This is something in Brazil, everybody has a cell phone. Some are working full-time, most are working part-time, and many are taking care of children, either their own children or younger siblings. So it also takes a lot of time because schools for children are also closed. And many live with families sharing small spaces, like we've heard from Alan in China, is the same. So I don't think they're taking buses to have classes because buses are crowded and very unsafe right now. So some of the solutions we thought. First, all content should be accessible by smartphone. They are connecting with their phones. That's what's happening. Every course assignment, even those practice-based, should be laptop independent. That is, you don't need to have a laptop to fulfill any assignments. You can do it with your phone. Course schedules should be as flexible as possible, and content should be accessible in several small doses. Instead of a lesson that runs for 2 hours straight, there should be small doses they can access in different times and not spending a lot of data. So the course that I teach is visual planning. It's mandatory for journalism students, and it covers the basic concepts and abilities concerning visual communication. So my goal, which I think is probably a dream, but it's what I'm reaching for right now, it's to leave no student behind, because we plan for the majority of students, but in this case, you have to consider the minority. And if you reach them, it's better for everyone. I don't know if we're gonna meet that goal, but it's what we're reaching for right now. So the solutions to adapt. So let me show you a few adaptations I did for the course. So before, I taught this class in a computer lab. So I had fairly 1.2 students per computer, so it wasn't that bad, with Adobe software, which was not legal, was bootleg Adobe software because public universities have no money. And now it's freedom of tools. They can choose the tools they're gonna use. They don't have to use InDesign, or they don't have to use Photoshop. So they can search, share, evaluate, and select their own tools and for activity, which they are really excited about. And I think maybe as future journalists, they like to investigate and find the best solutions. And so they can find tools that are online and they are free. So can they use it with their phones and spend no money? The delivery of content, well, before lecture classes, the usual, and now content is delivered in short videos, like from 2 minutes, 5-6 minutes tops, and a text summary of each video in the blog, and links for related content, and also collaborative contents. They build the content together. They can post on online forum and build the content together, as we've seen with Rachel before. And the content is available on different platforms, so it's easier to reach. So Google Classroom, blog, YouTube channel, and Instagram. The schedule before was twice a week, Mondays and Wednesdays from 4 to 6. And now it's mostly asynchronous. It has been a heavily discussed topic here in Brazil, here in my university, because some professors are refusing to do anything asynchronous. They just want to go and teach for 2 hours in a Google Meetings session. But we have to recognize that for us, it's excluding a lot of students. They simply cannot be 2 hours straight in front of the computer. They don't have that option. So most of the content in my class, it's asynchronous, it's self-study and asynchronous interaction. So we have forums and discussions online. And of course, I still keep a part of the class synchronous so we can share easier, but it's only up to 30% of the schedule. And it's more of hours. So I don't deliver any content per se in the synchronous meetings, but it's more like talking about it and sharing experiences and helping with activities. So before, I have to admit, I didn't pay a lot of attention to accessibility, which it's really embarrassing. I'm shamed when I realized that I didn't take special needs in consideration. And now there's medium and low quality available in videos, so they can choose. There are subtitles in videos for hearing impairment, and there are text summaries in every video on the blog, as well as images with descriptions, so people with low vision can also access. And now it's the end of the first week of teaching, so that's why I look so exhausted. It's been a busy week because I also teach other courses. And what we're going to do from now on, I think it's mostly keep the door open to have a dialogue with students, hearing from them. They are the only ones who can tell me what is working, what is not working, what do they need, and also constant evaluation. I think we need to be open to adapt and readapt and adjust again and again and again. And one thing that I did this first week was ask them, do you have any suggestions? And 100% of the students asked for patience and empathy from each other, from us. And they said that they will also keep in mind to be patient and empathetic with the teachers, which I think is great. So I hope I didn't overextend my time. Thank you very much. And these are the ways to contact me. And see if I can.
Thank you so much, Barbara. You stayed to time very well. Thank you so much. I think you've made some really interesting points. I was speaking to a colleague the other day, and I said, I just want things to start now, because I want to know what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, and how we just change that. So I think your final slide really resonated with me, that sense of just having ongoing dialogue. And you raised really interesting issues which are very pertinent, I think, to lots of us, of digital poverty and how we're addressing that, and how we're addressing it for staff and for students as well. So really great points. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next we have Claire Wolfe.
Hello.
So are you there, Claire, who looks as if she's on her holidays?
Only.
No. So Claire, you're going to talk about something a wee bit different, because you're going to talk about how you adapted and how you actually taught a module in those dark days of in May. So thank you. I won't delay you any longer. Hand over to you.
Right, I'll just try and, can I upload? Should be able to share screen.
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen, Claire.
Sorry about this, trying to get it to...
That's okay. I think probably, yeah, is that you? You okay?
Should do. Yeah, there it is. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, is that visible?
We can see it. Great, thanks.
Okay, good morning. This is largely a picture-based presentation. COVID-19 prompted me to adopt a social documentary approach to a year one photojournalism module. I hurriedly rewrote the assessment guidelines to enable students to use photos or upload photos with smartphones if they wanted to, because obviously the university kit was out of action. However, I did manage to get access to Photoshop for them, which they had throughout the duration of the module. This was assignment 2, and the biggest challenge was convincing them that all was not lost in lockdown. And to maintain engagement throughout the module. So yeah, those were some of the key things I needed to address. And obviously I was inspired by Robert Frank saying, you know, there's one thing a photograph must contain: the humanity of the moment, which was obviously something very central to COVID-19 as it still is today. They had to produce a series of news pictures, including portraits, together with extended captions, and I found that I had to provide a lot of emotional support to encourage students to give it a go. Being supportive yet constructive with formative feedback helped them to gain in confidence and to experiment with their shots. It helped by leading through example, showing them good COVID images already published and critiquing them, but also doing it myself to demonstrate the possibilities. After the event, I realised that much of the teaching style I had adopted fitted with the concept of presence in virtual teaching. And a key to this is connecting with students on a personal level. So I have done a lot of research into this subsequently, and it will inform my teaching more as I move into the new academic year, which for me the teaching starts next year. But there are a few references here and at the end if anyone's interested in that concept. So to the pictures, you may recognise 2 of these, the baby and the boy. All were published, and the middle one demonstrates that even a street scene depicts, you know, a moment in time. I regularly showed inspirational images at the start of online sessions. These are some of my efforts. A man having a joke about protective coverings, a book sharing phone box, and a tribute to the NHS. And after becoming a lockdown granny, here are some of the images of the separation angst. And the portrait, which I took on the left, was actually taken with an Apple Pro 11 in the portrait mode. And so to the student work, one student's brother swats needlessly for his GCSE exams in his bedroom. Obviously they had to have full stories to go with the pieces with quotes and so forth. An interview with a mum working remotely in Pennsylvania. She actually worked at the university, and she was discussing the pros and cons of home working. An aspiring artist doodling in Dudley Woods. Nicole from Minnesota and her dog Bella, which helped her endure 45 days quarantine after her studies in Barcelona were ended. Her visiting family caught COVID-19 one after another and weren't diagnosed until home. But the dog is what gave her the comfort to get through this terrible ordeal. A student's girlfriend with a face covering was taken in Worcester. One student gained an extended deadline and she managed to get out to a BLM event. Another student interviewed her sister, a model and business owner who experimented with her looks during lockdown. And a student in San Francisco who joined the online sessions at 5 o'clock in the morning, US time obviously, documented his mum having a test. Back at home, a student shielding managed to capture his mum working in the hallway. While in Finland, a kebab restaurateur explains how he is surviving. Back in America, another fast food outlet with a huge queue. So what did the students learn? Tenacity, news sense was obviously critical in that kind of situation to get a story from the very small pool of people that you're coming into contact with. Interviewing techniques and sensitivity. So obviously there was a lot of pre-work around the ethics of questioning and trauma, you know, people in trauma. Being camera ready at all times, and the importance of composition and being people focused. Also being brave enough to experiment. And overall, it developed their confidence. And as well, of course, they found out the need for the plan B. As some of their initial pictures, you know, they rejected in favour of better shots as they gained in confidence. And what did I learn? Well, about the need for greater empathy with students in distress, because a lot of them were in distress during this lockdown. And I found, as I'm sure a lot of you did, it took a lot more out of me in terms of support and encouragement. I learned to put myself out there as a facilitator and to have this presence online and with them, rather than the remoteness that can happen with online. I learned the importance of demonstrating what is required, and also the need to further develop my own online virtual teaching skills. I did improve my own skills. I'm not a professional photographer by any means, but most of all, I recognise the enormous talent and potential that young students, you know, even in a year one, have actually got, and what fantastic things they can achieve. So thank you for listening. And there's a few things on there if you want.
Thanks, Claire. That was fantastic. Some amazing images there. I feel as if you were probably, your students have documented probably parts of all of our lives in the last few months. Some lovely images there. And I really, I think your honesty there as well about just the challenges that we also faced, in that sense that we were going through that as well as the students. And I think probably lots of us had to really reflect on that as well. And I think we probably will need to continue to reflect on that as we go forward. And I think we probably need a lot of honesty in telling the students that You know, there are real challenges for everybody, so thank you so much for sharing that. We move now to Jake Mason and Gemma Horton, and Jake and Gemma are from Sheffield University, and they're going to tell us about Sheffield's very unique way of doing things. So very much looking forward to hearing that. So Jake and Emma, are you going to do it in the same way that Raj and Gail did and share it between you both?
Yes, we will. I think Gemma's just going to load it up now for us. Here it is.
Fantastic, thank you.
So, hello and welcome to our presentation. It is worth pointing out that this is very much an abridged version of our article due to the 10-minute time constraints. So with that in mind, if you do have any questions, please do ask us in the discussion section. Happy to clarify any points for you. Rather than change really in the time of COVID, our talk looks more at possible continuities. And our argument, really to put it briefly, is that the University of Sheffield's Journalism Studies Department has adopted a unique and innovative approach to undergraduate journalism education through its new 120 credit first year module, which was first introduced in 2018. And we're defining this quite broadly as the Sheffield School approach. So really our argument boils down to the idea that the nature of what makes a graduate educated and what a graduate is educated in is open to contestation. And we think that the Sheffield School approach has gone a significant way to overcome some of the many pre-existing tensions in British university-based journalism education programs. So in outlining our position, we think that this paper makes three key contributions. Firstly, we embed British journalism training within the political economy of UK higher education. Secondly, we look to unpack some of the tensions at sectoral, institutional and pedagogical levels. And then thirdly and finally, we also introduce the Sheffield School and its new approach to undergraduate journalism education. However, though, before I go ahead with that, there are some conceptual issues which we'd quite like to clarify firstly. So our study adopts the strategic relational approach first introduced by Bob Jessup, and it's a way to negotiate the structure agency dialectic. So with the SRA, what it does is it moves beyond instrumentalist or structuralist accounts of how social actors operate within and between institutions. So this is particularly important for us when looking at how journalism educators actually work within universities. So the point of the approach is it examines how social actors and their strategic selectivities shape the structural constraints of social systems. But at the same time, path-dependent structural constraints limit the range of strategic options available or open to those social actors as well. So the SRA quite cleverly folds structure and agency into a single dialectical moment, and in so doing it overcomes some of the weaknesses of, for instance, Bhaskara's critical realism or maybe Giddens' structuration theory as well. So applying the SRA then, we can examine how journalism educators as social actors negotiate and shape the structural constraints of universities and the higher education sector more broadly. But it also allows us to examine the dialectical interplay of tensions at various levels of abstraction. So for the purpose of this study, we've abstracted sectoral, institutional and pedagogical levels, and the diagram on screen tries to show how we've nested these levels on a continuum. So they both work down from the sectoral to the pedagogical, but also up again from the pedagogical to the institutional to the sectoral, and they all have sort of a dialectical influence on each other. Turning to the sectoral level then, the first one, it is important to note that in the UK, as I'm sure many of you are aware, journalism training has historically been done on the job or in vocational training colleges. But what we've seen, particularly since the mid-1980s, is a significant growth in university-based journalism training programs. So we saw postgraduate courses emerge mostly from the early 1970s. Undergraduate journalism courses, though, really began to boom from the early 1990s. And this is in part due to the conversion of former polytechnics in 1992. So this overall sort of massification, for want of a better word, of the university HE system in the UK didn't occur in a vacuum. And we want to try and set this against the broader shift in the UK's growth model from what might be called a Keynesian welfare national state, so based on Fordist principles of mass production and also mass consumption, to what's actually emerged as a Schumpeterian workfare post-national regime, which is instead based on flexible accumulation, financialization, and this sort of ideal of a knowledge-based economy where universities are really at the center. But also against the sort of the high-minded vision of a knowledge-based economy, there are also some quite deeply practical political concerns associated with the expansion of HE. And one of them is that it's operated as an institutional fix for youth unemployment caused by the shift between growth models. And what we've seen is this fix has been applied by successive UK governments to try and resolve some of those tensions. All of this at the same time has also been undergirded by a series of new public management practices, for instance, internal competition through rankings, research income and other metrics, which I'm sure many of us are aware of. And really you could say that for universities, Blair's mantra of education, education, education has appeared increasingly instead as competition, competition, competition. So in journalism departments, we think this competition has appeared in two forms. Firstly, in sort of the traditional sense between practitioners and scholars, the former being hired en masse to support the teaching of journalism in universities when we saw that mass expansion. Though interestingly, the line between practitioners and scholars has in some cases also blurred and merged together to form the academics identified famously by Harkup in 2011. And we also feel that these personnel tensions are cross-cut by institutional confusion over where journalism studies actually sits, in which department. So does it belong with media studies and broadly cultural studies, or should it actually exist under communication studies, or even on its own? And I'm sure in your own institutions, these are questions which sometimes arise. Secondly, then, as a vocational subject, we also note that journalism courses look for accreditation from traditional training bodies and boards. So in our scenario, the NCTJ or the BJTC are some of the common ones. And with industry-sponsored training and greater work experience placements, employer perspectives have actually begun to shape some of the curriculum choices in university training programs. And we've noted that for critical cultural studies scholars, this deep embrace of industry has often been quite a bitter pill to swallow, which contributes further to those on sort of ongoing personnel tensions. On a day-to-day basis, though, to bring down the sectoral and the institutional to the pedagogical level, we noted that modularization and outcome-based teaching and learning, those sort of watchwords of the competition-oriented university, they're now very much the norm across British journalism. So what we want to point out is that the UK has seen a relative decline in its media industry in the face of income pressure from social media platforms and search engines. But at the same time, we argue that in this context, data literacy and digital skills are increasingly important, or certainly have the potential to become increasingly important for trainee journalists. Yet, as I'm sure you're also very much aware, journalism students are rarely innately numerical. So journalism departments face this interesting dilemma in trying to negotiate these difficulties. At the same time, with that shift towards flexible employment practices in the media industry, very much tied to the new growth model around sort of precarious work, the sort of Schumpeterian ideal of creative destruction, there are also calls for students to receive entrepreneurial training. Now, whether these skills are necessarily beneficial or even desirable is itself a matter of contention. But to that end, we feel that actually the Sheffield School approach, which I'm going to hand over to Gemma now to explain, actually goes some way to resolve these tensions quite nicely. So I'll pass it over to Gemma.
Okay. So the Department of Journalism Studies, based at the University of Sheffield, it's founded in 1994, and it's a Russell Group university providing a dedicated journalism studies programme. So the new undergraduate module, which was introduced in the academic year of 2018-19, is JNL 120, Essential Journalism. And as Jake said, it's 120 credits. So within this module, we have 3 teaching strands. So the first strand is analysing news. So this strand encourages students to think about the news they read by analysing its language, why it's written in a certain way, and different types of news values. And the second strand of journalism issues encourages students to think about the issues that journalists face in today's society. So, for example, we've already talked today about issues surrounding journalist safety. So that's one sort of topic that comes up in this strand. And the third is the practical strand. So this is where students develop those practical skills that they need to be able to go out and write and produce news stories. So the teaching assessments have also been adapted, so they focus on essays and portfolios, but then these are all brought together in a mini Viva that is performed at the end of the academic year. So the way in which this divide has been overcome is discussed with an example here. So at the mini Viva, which I said is the end of year assessment, students have to link together and apply what they have learned in each strand and demonstrate how they link together. So this is done throughout the year with a range of activities. So for example, we can see the 3 strands here. So under journalism issues, there is the topic that is covered on journalism safety, and this is highlighted in the department's International Journalism Week. So students have to attend International Journalism Week and cover it by writing news stories on the various events that take place. So in turn, this is informed from their time on the Analysing News strand, where they learn about the different types of news values. So they see what type of story is considered newsworthy, which they can then apply when searching for their own stories in the practical journalism strand. They also learn about whose voice is heard in the news and who should be given a platform. Again, this is applied to the International Journalism Week conference when they have to decide whose voice should be amplified through their reporting on issues concerning journalist safety. So the modules all are intended to complement each other, and this is important because the strands focus on giving students an understanding of the industry that they will go to work in. So for example, in journalism issues, they learn about who owns the media and how these institutions are run. So it's vital that they understand this if they are going to go on and work for these institutions and actually become a part of them. In addition, it's also important for them to understand the institutions that they may interact with. So for example, through public affairs, they learn about the different bodies such as local government. In journalism issues, they also learn about the United Nations. So this learning can then be applied to the practical side, as they will be able to go away and understand how these institutions work, and they'll also have a better understanding of how they can communicate with them. And by also learning about the industry, they can also become aware of how journalism operates as the fourth estate. Again, something they can take away and apply to their own practical experience when they become part of the civic community. But in the future, there's probably going to have to be some developments, as we've already highlighted. So it might be possible for the school to develop through an increased focus on coding. So as we've seen, this is a skill that's becoming increasingly important for journalists to develop, and it can also help them to promote their own investigative work within data journalism, and this is particularly a big topic following the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And it might also be beneficial for students to learn more about the rise of social media, as these platforms are now very successful at promoting news. So I'm sure you'll have seen all the Facebook stories circulating during the COVID pandemic. So now what we have is this tension between traditional journalism and these platforms. So it would be good for students to understand these tensions, because they might actually have to address them when they're working in the industry themselves. And this fundamental knowledge of how they actually are run might give them an added boost. So to conclude, the Sheffield School offers an innovative way to close this gap that we see between the traditional and practical tensions in higher education by encouraging students to think critically about the industry and use the theory that they learn and apply it to their practical studies. By doing this, it sets a new precedent for how students can get the most from a university education that's typically grounded in theory. And overall, this way of thinking is designed at better equipping students for when they actually go out and work and become a journalist. So that's our presentation. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to any questions.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Jake and Gemma, I feel as if you've really just grounded me there in exactly what our jobs are all about, which is creating really interesting journalism programmes rather than feeling in panic mode, which is where I'm spending most of my time at the moment. So you've really taken me back to the things that I'm really quite passionate about, and I have to say I'm quite interested and a wee bit envious of your 120 credit model, and I may well come back and pick your minds about that, so thank you so much. We're going to move on to our last presentation now, and again warmly welcome our colleagues from Brazil, Melina and Juliana, and you're going to tell us a bit about your experiences and how you've managed teaching your students and preparing your students in incredibly challenging times, and as Barbara says, incredibly challenging in your country at the moment. So I'm, without much further ado, hand over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I will share my screen. A minute, please. Here, do you see this, the PowerPoint? Yes? Okay. 1 minute, I'm sorry. You are, I don't know, you are seeing all the screen? It's okay? So, good morning, everyone. My name is Melina de la Barrera Aires. I am a professor at Universidade Federal de Santa Catarina in the south of Brazil.
And I am Juliana Freire. PhD student in journalism at the same institution. Today, we would like to share with you the experience with our extension project, Jornalismo e Ação Comunitária, created in the journalism course in the coronavirus pandemic context.
So before starting, I have to explain that in our course, we have the discipline called communitary journalism that aims to bring students closer to popular realities. At the same time, it seeks to empower communities through communitary communication. We understand that communication is much more than a right. Communication is an empowerment tool that promotes social changes. So I have been working with the students inside vulnerable communities. In this discipline, students are encouraged to carry out communication projects, co-creating with the locals. You may not know, Florianopolis, which is the capital of the state of Santa Catarina, is a medium-sized island in the south of Brazil. The city has one of the best life standards in the country, but it's also marked by social inequality. Here, the pandemic crisis started in March, and it affects everyone, but not at the same way. Studies have shown that social inequality that causes poverty in some countries has contributed to the higher lethality of the rate of COVID-19. In Brazil, basic disease prevention practices are not even possible in many of these contexts, making social isolation and hygiene prevention even harder. When the pandemic arrived, the massive media started to spread a diversity of information about care, prevention, risk, etc. But this information did not consider the population specificities, the popular specificities. Besides that, inside the communities, the main channel of information is the social media, such WhatsApp and Facebook. In these channels, fake news are shared without filters and can confuse the population about how to protect themselves from COVID-19. Due to this scenario, in March, Priest Wilson Groh, a reference leadership in Florianopolis, wrote a public letter entitled Gift for the Future, which indicated that the fight against COVID in poor context would demand several actions, including information. Wilson Groh is a priest who has lived in the communities for 30 years. There, he developed works to strengthen citizenship and education for social transformation. He created one institute which serves the metropolitan region of Florianopolis. The letter of Priest Wilson Groh boosted the work of our group. We contacted him and proposed a partnership to develop quality information co-created with the locals. However, at this moment, all the classes in our university were suspended. So here, the whole context that Barbara presents applies. We could only work on extension projects remotely. So the challenge arose: how to start this project respecting the social distance guidelines. As a solution, me and Juliana, who is also an intern teacher in communitary journalism, we create a remote project. With the help of a group of undergraduate students, we started to work at the Maciço do Morro da Cruz, which is a complex of 17 communities located in downtown Florianopolis. Around 22,000 people live there. We started the project inside Montserrat, that is one of these communities. In order to provide secure information, we came out with the idea of producing a flyer that we call Pipa Informativa, or Informative Guide. Currently, 4 printed editions have been produced and around 10 virtual editions were distributed via social networks. The printed editions are distributed by community leaders, which give more credibility to our work, especially because most of the residents have not met us in person. Another issue is that we have no economic support. The students, Diogo Medeiros and Claimara Silva, work voluntarily. The flyers are printed by the UFSC Professor Association. The first edition had 5,000 copies and the remaining 2,000 copies. Juliana, you are muted.
Okay, sorry. All the work is being done remotely. And our biggest challenge is that we have never been in the community. In order to catch the community interest, we needed to adapt the educational methodology from Brazilian educator Paulo Freire for a remote context. The dialogical method and practice are our methodological guidelines.
The practice has the popular reality at the starting point. The idea is to generate actions able to contribute to social changes. The dialogue is the main tool that allows the collective reflection between academics and the community residents. In order to get closer to the community, even remotely, we carry out several actions, such as, first, we hold remote periodic meetings with our partners, Prince Wilson Grown Institute and the Montserrat Community Council. Together, we decided the subject of each flyer and evaluated all past editions. Second, the group follows several local leaders in the social media to know what is happening in the communities. Third, we have been using Google Earth to create a representative image to the communities to be used in the visual art of the flyers. The first flyer was about form of prevention against coronavirus. In this edition, we noticed that we needed to use more colloquial language. So in the second edition, that the subject was social rights, we started to produce a comic. That was another huge challenge because we needed to simplify the information, simulate a conversation between neighbors, while keeping clear the main information. The drawing must be proper to the message. In addition, we wanted to represent the community and the people without stereotyping them. We did not want to follow in the common representation of favelas, linked to the image of poverty and violence. In the first edition, we create a character called Marlene, that is the woman that you are seeing in the PowerPoint, which is a Black woman who lives in the community and is very well informed. In the second edition, Marlene becomes an important interlocutor and a source of secure information. In our evaluation of this edition, we realized that this message was more assertive, more effective. With the second flyer, we started an action on social networks in order to denounce that the public service did not have enough workers to attend the population with the urge that the situation needed. For that, we create with the Institute and the Montserrat Community Council some hashtags to draw the attention from the public authorities. Our action had very positive results. Within weeks, government representatives contacted the Institute's social workers. Concluding, throughout the process, we have learned a lot. First, journalism must keep on going. There is always a way to be present. Second, communities increasingly need secure information and careful look at their realities and needs. Third, it is not possible to produce for the community without their participation. Exchanging knowledge is crucial in this process. So thank you very much for listening. And here you are an example of the third edition of the flyer that we talk about agglomeration and the consequences. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Melina and Juliana. That was fascinating and quite a different approach that you've taken to address the needs of obviously teaching for your students and for the community. I really, I think I probably, like lots of colleagues and lots of people in the industry, I think there is, you know, there's real future, real opportunity in how we meet the needs of some really small communities as well, and how we speak to them. So I love the fact that you use colloquial language and you create characters that people could relate to. I thought that was fascinating. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone in that session. I would say we probably have about maybe 10 minutes for questions, which will take us up to 1 o'clock UK time. And people are welcome to stay on. We do have the Zoom for a little while longer. But I just wonder if anybody has, we have some questions in the chat. So Fred, you've got a question, which you're welcome to ask, or I'm quite happy to read out on your behalf, although I'm sure each of the panelists can read it.
Yeah, I can ask the question. I think universities would love, you know, such a big credit module. And in Coventry, we toyed with the idea of a 60 credit MA module. And I think one of the things that the universities say they like this is they think it will save staffing. And I was wondering what, I mean, I've put a series of questions there, really. Is this only in the first year? Does it reduce workload for staff and students? How do you deal with the high risk, high stakes in case a student fails? If you have modules divided into 20 credits or 30 credits, you know, if they fail a 20 credit module, they can pass the others. But how about a 120 credit? And how about part-time students if you have any? If it's a 120 credit, how do you deal with part-time students?
Okay, so let me just pull up the questions again so I can see. So the 120 credit module is only for first year students, and it's not been rolled out yet for second or third year. It is considered that it may be in future, but really, as the first year also is, the credits don't bear on their final degree classification, it was seen as sort of generally a safer option to introduce it at that level there. Also to make sure students roll up to essentially the same ability of that first year. In terms of workload then, really what's happened is the modules have been shifted from being a standalone modules of say 10 to 20 credits into actually being a strand within the 120 credit module. So the 120 credit has sort of been an umbrella module which covers all of the others. So in terms of workload, that stayed roughly the same, and the same for students there as well. In terms of, I'll tend to fit part-time students first, there aren't any part-time students on the programme, so there's not been an issue there with mixing the two. But really with the shift towards it being that 120 credit module, the idea has been to actually encourage students to recognise the links between, say, the work they do on their practical portfolios, but also then the theoretical work they'll do in the concept side of the module. Because often we get complaints, particularly from students who are learning about, say, the fourth estate, but they want to go into sports journalism, and they say, well, what on earth does this have to do with me? I just want to be able to cover football, for instance. So it's been trying to get them to understand that there are direct links between the two, and that actually being a journalist is actually, you have a civic responsibility as well. You're not just there to entertain, you're there to inform and hopefully to educate as well. So it's trying to encourage students to understand those aspects. In terms of the risk of failure, as far as I'm aware, there's not been a student who's failed, but I can come back to you I don't have the information at hand right now on what the process is for failure, if that does occur.
Thank you very much, Jake.
No problem.
Thanks a lot, Jake. Could I ask, and this is, I think, probably maybe a question for Claire and Claire, Barbara, actually, and probably Melina and Juliana. What was obvious was that you, as we all did, needed to adapt really quickly to an assessment that was different to what maybe the students were told they were going to be doing. How supportive was your universities, or were your universities in doing that, and how did the students react to that?
I could answer for the photography. There wasn't a problem because the actual assessment as it appeared in the module spec didn't change. What I redid was all the material built in around the assessment brief. So whereas they were meant to be using the professional cameras, you know, from the, you know, I obviously changed that to allow them to use mobile and any kit they could. And I put in a lot more information about how they could source images during a lockdown, because obviously their initial reaction was, oh, that's it, I failed out, I can't get out, I can't take any pictures, because the examples of news events that I had in that assessment brief were things like going out to, you know, demonstrations or, you know, news events. So I went immediately into that knee-jerk, right, they need to have more guidance about how this is actually possible. So no issue at all with the university there.
See if you compared it to what the students did maybe last year in that module. Did the quality of the work change? Did it improve? Was it worse? Was it the same?
Ironically, this is the first year I've taught that module, but what I can say from the person who moderated it over the last few years is that she was really impressed with the new sense in it, because it meant that, you know, we had to focus on, there has to still be a news story in this. So I think it has really, really refined their news sense and also their ability to talk to people and to extract a story rather than going along to something that is obviously a story and taking some pictures. So there has been a recognisable difference there, and I should be very interested to see in year 2 how that develops, and if their news sense and their ability to talk to people is better as they progress through, despite the continued regulations, because they had to get through quite a big boundary to actually get to talk to anyone. You know what first years it is anyway, but it was doubly so. So I think, you know, I will monitor it and see how that develops over the course.
What about Juliana, Melina, or Barbara? Did you have any resistance from students to perhaps changing what they thought they were going to be doing?
Yes, one thing is different. Ivana explained to me that in Britain you have to follow what was planned before, but here it's really, they're used to adapting because teachers can change the program at any time, so they're more open to that, but they're really anxious about understanding the assignment and the requirements, and so they're asking a lot for a lot of written information and written description of every requirement, and that will make them feel more at ease. But I think they're more anxious than actually worried. They're just nervous about it.
Here is most the same thing. The students were anxious to know how the situation will go on. But in this project and in this discipline, community journalism, I feel that the students want to do things to change something, to change the reality outside. So we always say we are at home, but we are doing things to change the reality. We are not in the community. We even know these people, but we want to be closer. We want to change something, to contribute with something. And this movement is gorgeous. I am very proud of my team, because this project, we are for me, Juliana, and 2 undergraduate students, and we do everything. And for me, this is something that my work have a purpose like this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a really good point actually in which to end, Melina, that point of what our purpose is. And I think we probably are all thinking about that at the moment. Can I just thank our speakers this morning, Melina, Juliana, Barbara, Claire, Jake and Gemma. I think you've given us lots to think about. And actually, I think all of the speakers today have given us lots to be inspired about. I know that many of us are feeling quite stressed at the moment at the prospect of what's to come. And I feel less stressed than I did at 10:30 this morning. So somewhat selfishly, thank you very much. Thanks also to my AJE colleagues who've helped out today. Deborah Wilson-David, who's been looking after the chat. David Baines, who set the whole thing up. So it's David we have to thank for the fact that everything has ran smoothly technically. Thank you so much, David. And Sean for looking after the chat in the first session. So thank you. None of these things ever happen on their own. Just before we finish up, what I would just like to remind friends and colleagues is that, you know, the AJE is a community and that we are here to support each other. So with that in mind, I would like to just tell you about some of the things that we would like to do between now and Christmas. So first up, I've had quite a good feedback from colleagues saying that they would very much like us to think about a practice-based workshop from the point of view of how do we run news days. So what I'll probably do is come round and ask some of you that seem to be doing it quite well, or if you know someone who's doing it quite well, can you pitch in? So look out for some details about that. We are holding an event. We're very keen to maximise the opportunity that Zoom provides us with at the moment to hold some short seminar sessions on different subject matters. So the first one will be on October the 28th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's looking at the reporting of the US presidential elections. And we've already lined up some speakers, some colleagues from the United States who are journalists and journalism academics, and some colleagues from the UK who are journalism academics. So we will send you more information about that, and I very much hope that you will join in. Even get your students to join this class. The seminar, will be very much about the reporting rather than about education around it. And I think really there'll be a lot for lots of us to learn. So hopefully you can join that. We also are thinking about, and again, I would be really interested to hear what people think. We've been thinking, should we do a nice afternoon session on stress management? All of a sudden, what's really clear from this morning is that everyone's workloads have increased significantly. So how do we look after ourselves? I think self-care is really important in these days. And I'm sure some of our universities are providing us with lots of support, but also know from conversations with colleagues that some universities could do better. So let us do better, and tell me if you think you would like something like that. Upcoming, we have our annual conference, which we are tentatively setting for the beginning of December, but we will decide very, very soon if that's going to happen. We were hoping to be in Sheffield Hallam. I've just seen pop up on the timeline this morning that there are even more local lockdowns. So I think we need to be realistic about that, but I will speak to Lada, who I can see is here today, and I will speak to the committee and we'll get a final decision and let you know about that very soon. Attached to the annual conference is our AGM, which we will still hold online. And our elections. This is a year for nominating a new committee. So please look out in your email box quite soon, because we will be sending out nominations for that. So I just want to close again by saying thank you so much. I think that yet again, I'm reminded that, you know, AJE provides us all with a community of very like-minded friends and colleagues. And I would just like to thank everybody for coming along this morning. And I think hopefully giving us all some really good ideas for how we can move forward. I would like to really warmly thank our international speakers this morning. You are most welcome in our community, and we hope that you will continue to contribute to the conversations that we're all having. And if there's anything we can do to support you, please don't hesitate to ask. I think also there are lots of opportunities now to share what we do, and really, and this point was made, I think actually in our June conference by Deborah at NTU, which is, you know, our universities may see us as competitors, but actually we're not. And so how do we work together? And already I've had conversations with colleagues about how we can work together. So sharing some lectures. So Sally Ann Duncan, who most of you will probably know because of her fantastic work on suicide reporting, Sally Ann and I have had conversations about how we could share some classes. She's going to dip into some of mine, I'm going to dip into some of hers. So I think opportunities, how can we do that? How can we do that effectively so that actually our students really benefit? And I think we should take opportunities like that. I'm seeing a word that's popping up in the chat quite a lot at the moment, which is inspiration. And I would say I'm leaving here today feeling very inspired and a bit less scared than I did earlier on today. So thank you so much to everyone. It's been lovely to see so many friends and colleagues. If this is your first event, I hope you'll come back to a future one. And I very, very much hope that very soon we can meet each other in person, because it's lovely to see everybody on camera. It's so much better when you can see them in person and catch up and see their photographs of their grandchildren, Claire, and just generally say hello to each other. So thank you so much for today. Some of us can stay on. We've got the Zoom for a wee while longer. If you want to stay on and have some chat, please feel free to do so. If you have sunshine is quite a rarity in Glasgow, so I will be taking full advantage of it this afternoon. But if you're heading off to a work meeting to get back to some lectures, thank you so much. We'll see you next time. We will hopefully see some of you for our US presidential election symposium on the 29th. But please send us ideas. Send us ideas for things that we can do that will help you in doing your job. That's why we exist. So thanks so much. Goodbye. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.